You're not being fired because you failed. You're being fired because I need you out of my way." Cameron Whitaker said those words calmly, sitting across from his wife at the breakfast table they had shared for nearly 8 years. Victoria Hayes stared at him, waiting for the moment when he would laugh and admit it was some cruel misunderstanding. But he didn't. The man who once promised they would build an empire together had just placed a termination letter beside her coffee cup. The same table where they had celebrated their first major investment. The same table where he had held her hand and promised they were partners in everything. "Cameron, are you serious?" Victoria asked quietly. Her voice was steady, but her fingers tightened around the ceramic mug in front of her. "I'm serious," he replied. "Northvale needs a different direction. The board agrees." Victoria looked down at the document again. Her name was printed clearly at the top. Victoria Hayes, Chief Strategy Officer. 8 years of work reduced to 3 words. Employment terminated. "The board agrees," she repeated. "Or you decided they should agree?" For the first time, Cameron looked uncomfortable. Just for a second. Then the expression disappeared. "This isn't personal." That sentence hurt more than the letter. Because Victoria knew better. In business, people said, "This isn't personal," when they wanted permission to do something that was deeply personal. She looked around the kitchen she had designed, the home she had built, the life she thought they were protecting together. "After everything I did for Northvale?" she asked. Cameron leaned back in his chair. "Victoria, I appreciate your contribution, but you need to understand something. The company has my name on it." There it was. The truth he had never said out loud. Not the whole truth. Just the version he believed. Victoria wasn't his partner anymore. She was a person who had stayed too long. A person he thought he could replace. "Who's taking over my role?" she asked. Cameron picked up his phone without looking at her. "Lauren Mitchell will handle strategy moving forward." Victoria felt a strange emptiness in her chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just disbelief. Lauren. Someone who had joined the company 6 months ago. Someone who had never sat through the late-night investor calls. Someone who had never rebuilt the company's financial model after their biggest client walked away. "You're replacing 8 years with 6 months?" Victoria whispered. Cameron stood up and adjusted his watch. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He walked toward the door, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I hope you find something that makes you happy." Victoria almost smiled at that. Something that makes her happy. As if she hadn't spent years helping him chase his dream. As if she hadn't sacrificed her own opportunities so his company could survive. When the front door closed, the house became completely silent. Victoria sat there alone, staring at the termination letter beside her untouched breakfast. Then her eyes moved to the small black notebook sitting on the counter. The notebook she had used every day since Northvale was created. Every strategy, every investor meeting, every decision that saved the company. She picked it up slowly. Not because she wanted revenge. Because for the first time in years, she needed to remember something Cameron had forgotten. She was never just the woman standing beside the company. She was one of the reasons it existed. And Cameron Whitaker was about to discover the biggest mistake he had ever made. For 8 years, Victoria Hayes believed she was building a company with her husband. But looking back at everything that happened after that breakfast, she realized something painful. She had been building Northvale while Cameron Whitaker was building a story where he was the only person who mattered. Long before the termination letter appeared on their kitchen table, Victoria was the person quietly holding everything together. When Cameron first started Northvale Capital Technologies, it was not the billion-dollar company people saw today. It was a small office with borrowed furniture, a handful of employees, and more uncertainty than success. Cameron had the confidence. He had the vision. He knew how to stand in front of people and make them believe in an idea. But Victoria knew how to turn that idea into reality. She was the one who studied market trends late at night. She was the one who created the first investor presentation. She was the one who built relationships with partners who did not believe in Cameron yet. "You make people believe in the future," Victoria once told him. "I just make sure we have a way to get there." Cameron laughed when she said that. He kissed her forehead and told her, "That is why we are unstoppable." Back then, he meant it. At least she believed he did. In their first year, they worked from a small apartment in Chicago. The dining table became a workspace. The living room became a meeting area. They celebrated every small victory together. Their first contract. Their first major investor meeting. Their first time seeing the company mentioned in the news. Victoria still remembered Cameron looking at the article and saying, "One day, people will know this name." She thought he meant their name. But over the years, something changed. As Northvale grew, so did Cameron's need to be seen as the person behind every success. When the company landed a major partnership, cameras followed him. When investors praised the company's growth, reporters asked him about his leadership. Victoria stood nearby, smiling, because she thought being a team meant sharing the spotlight. She did not need applause. She needed the company to succeed. But slowly, her name disappeared from conversations. New employees heard about Cameron's genius. They heard about his determination. They heard about the founder who built everything from nothing. Few people knew about the woman who spent countless nights making sure everything behind the scenes worked. One afternoon, a young analyst named Marcus stopped by her office. He looked nervous before speaking. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Victoria looked up from her computer. "Of course." He hesitated. "Is it true you created the investor strategy for the Redwood Crest deal?" Victoria smiled slightly. "Why do you ask?" Marcus lowered his voice. "Because everyone says Cameron did." Victoria looked away for a moment. It was not the first time she heard that. But somehow, hearing it from someone new made it feel different. It made her realize how far things had shifted. She had spent years protecting Cameron's image while he slowly erased hers. That evening, after leaving the office for the last time, Victoria did not go home angry. She went home thinking. She opened old files, reviewed old documents, and looked through the records she had kept carefully over the years. Not because she wanted to destroy Cameron, because she needed to understand what exactly he had taken from her. And that was when she discovered something she never expected. The investors had not been following Cameron's leadership alone. Hidden inside the company records were years of messages, reports, and agreements showing one clear truth. The people who believed in Northvale had always been watching Victoria Hayes. The next morning, Cameron Whitaker walked into Northvale Capital Technologies like nothing had changed. The same glass walls surrounded his office. The same executives greeted him with polite smiles. The same city skyline stretched behind his desk. To everyone watching from the outside, he was still the confident founder who had built a financial empire from the ground up. But inside the company, something felt different. Victoria Hayes was gone, and Cameron wanted everyone to believe that was a good thing. "We are moving forward," he announced during the morning leadership meeting. "Northvale needs a new perspective. We cannot keep relying on old methods." Around the table, executives nodded carefully. Nobody challenged him. Not because they agreed. Because Cameron had always been the person everyone answered to. He was the man whose name was attached to the company. A few hours later, he introduced Lauren Mitchell as the new head of strategic operations. Lauren was smart, confident, and polished. She knew how to speak the language of investors and executives. Cameron believed she was exactly what Northvale needed. "This is a fresh chapter," he told the team. "We are building something even bigger." The announcement received applause, but it was quieter than Cameron expected. He noticed it. He just chose not to acknowledge it. What he did not know was that many employees were not questioning Lauren's ability. They were questioning the decision behind replacing Victoria. Victoria had never been the loudest person in the room. She was not the one chasing attention or taking credit. But people remembered who stayed late when problems appeared. They remembered who answered difficult questions during investor calls. They remembered who listened when employees had concerns. Meanwhile, Victoria spent her first day away from Northvale trying to understand what came next. She sat at a small coffee shop near her apartment, looking at the city moving outside the window. For years, her schedule had been built around the company. Every morning had a meeting. Every evening had another problem to solve. Now, for the first time in years, there was silence. Her phone rang. It was Marcus, the young analyst who had spoken with her before she left. "Victoria, I hope I am not bothering you." "You are not," she said. "What happened?" There was a pause. "People are confused here." Victoria looked down at her coffee. "They will adjust." "Maybe," Marcus replied. "But there is something you should know. The Redwood Crest team has been asking questions." Victoria became quiet. Redwood Crest Partners was not just another investor. They were one of Northvale's most important financial partners. "What kind of questions?" she asked. Marcus lowered his voice. "They want to know why you are no longer involved in the strategy meetings." Victoria leaned back in her chair. For the first time since leaving the company, she felt something other than disappointment. She felt clarity. Cameron had assumed removing her would make things easier. But he had forgotten one important detail. The people who truly understood Northvale knew exactly who had been building the future. That afternoon, Cameron received an email marked urgent. It was from Redwood Crest Partners. The message was short. They requested a private conversation. They did not mention Lauren. They did not mention the new direction. They only asked one question. Where is Victoria Hayes? Cameron stared at the screen, confused. For the first time since breakfast, he realized the company did not move forward the way he expected. It stopped and looked back. The email from Redwood Crest Partners remained open on Cameron Whitaker's screen for almost 10 minutes. He read the same sentence again and again, hoping the meaning would somehow change. It did not. We would like to schedule an immediate strategy discussion with Victoria Hayes regarding Northvale's future direction. Not Cameron. Not the new executive he had introduced that morning. Victoria, the woman he had just removed from the company. Cameron leaned back in his chair, trying to convince himself it was nothing. They probably just want clarification, he said quietly. But even he did not believe that. Investors did not request urgent meetings because they were curious. They requested them when something important had changed. Across the city, Victoria sat in her apartment reviewing the same information from a completely different perspective. She had spent years believing her value came from helping Cameron succeed. Now, for the first time, she was seeing the company without the emotional attachment. She opened old strategy documents, investor notes, and growth plans she had created. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Every major decision that changed Northvale's future carried her fingerprints. The expansion into new markets. The restructuring after their biggest client left. The plan that attracted Redwood Crest Partners. She had never hidden her work. She had simply never demanded recognition for it. Her phone rang again. This time, it was not Marcus. It was Daniel Brooks, a senior partner at Redwood Crest. Victoria hesitated before answering. Victoria, I hope I am not catching you at a bad time. No, I am available, she replied. Daniel's voice was calm, but serious. I heard what happened. Victoria looked out the window. Then you already know I am no longer with Northvale. That is exactly why I am calling. There was a pause. Our firm invested in Northvale because of the strategic framework you created. We were told Cameron was leading the company, but the reason we trusted the long-term plan was your work. Victoria stayed quiet. Hearing it from someone outside the company felt different. For years, she had wondered if she was simply helping behind the scenes. Now someone was confirming that the work had always mattered. Daniel, I appreciate that, but Northvale is Cameron's company. Daniel responded immediately. Victoria, ownership and leadership are not always the same thing. Those words stayed with her. Meanwhile, Cameron was dealing with a different kind of pressure. Lauren presented the first update under her new strategy direction. The presentation looked impressive. The slides were polished. The numbers sounded promising. But when the investors joined the call, the questions became harder. Can you explain the reasoning behind the market expansion model? One investor asked. Lauren looked toward Cameron. That was part of the previous strategy framework. Another investor followed up. Then why was the person who created that framework removed? The room became quiet. Cameron felt the attention shift away from him. For the first time, he was not controlling the conversation. Later that evening, Cameron called Victoria. She watched his name appear on her phone screen. A week earlier, she would have answered immediately. This time, she waited. When she finally picked up, his voice sounded different. Less certain. Victoria, we need to talk. About what? She asked. Cameron paused. About Northvale. She looked at the termination letter still sitting on her desk. The same letter he thought ended her role forever. I thought you said the company needed a different direction, she replied. Cameron had no answer. Because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. He had not removed a problem. He had removed the person everyone trusted. And by the next morning, the entire board would have to face a decision that could change Northvale forever. The boardroom at Northvale Capital Technologies had never felt this quiet. Cameron Whitaker sat at the end of the long glass table, surrounded by executives who had spent years following his decisions without question. But today was different. Nobody was looking at him for answers. They were waiting to see what he would do next. Across from him sat the representatives from Redwood Crest Partners. Their expressions were professional, but their message was clear. Something had changed. We need to understand the decision-making process behind Victoria Hayes leaving the company, Daniel Brooks said. Cameron folded his hands together. Victoria chose to leave after we made some organizational changes. It was a careful answer. Too careful, Daniel noticed. That is interesting, he replied. Because our understanding was that she did not choose to leave. She was removed. The room became still. Cameron looked toward the other executives, expecting someone to support him. Nobody spoke. For the first time, he realized that silence inside a boardroom could say more than words. Northvale is my company, Cameron said. I built this organization. Daniel nodded slowly. You founded it. That is true. But the question is who built the systems that allowed it to grow. Cameron did not answer. Because somewhere deep down, he already knew. Meanwhile, Victoria was sitting across from Daniel at a quiet restaurant downtown. She had agreed to meet, but she still felt uncertain. She did not want to walk back into Northvale simply because Cameron was facing consequences. She needed to know whether she was valued or just needed. I do not want to return because someone finally noticed my absence, she said. Daniel listened carefully. Then do not return for them. Return because you understand your own value. Those words stayed with her. For years, Victoria had measured success by how well she supported others. She had forgotten what it felt like to make decisions for herself. Back at Northvale, the situation continued to change. Lauren Mitchell presented a revised strategy plan to the leadership team. It looked impressive on paper, but when questions came from investors, the answers were uncertain. What is the long-term risk assessment behind this expansion? One executive asked. Lauren paused. She looked through her notes. That information was developed under the previous strategy model. Another executive exchanged a glance with someone across the table. Everyone knew what that meant. The strategy they were using was Victoria's work. The person they removed was the person they were still depending on. That evening, Cameron returned home and found the house unusually quiet. The same kitchen where he had ended Victoria's career days earlier now felt unfamiliar. He noticed the empty space where her notebook used to sit. A small detail, something he would never have noticed before. He opened his laptop and searched through old company files. For the first time, he was not looking for numbers. He was looking for her name. One document after another appeared. Strategy plans, investor reports, growth models, all created by Victoria Hayes. Cameron stared at the screen as the truth slowly became impossible to avoid. The company he believed he controlled had been built with someone he pushed away. The next morning, the board scheduled a final meeting. Victoria received the invitation before Cameron did. The subject line was simple: future leadership discussion. She looked at the email for a long moment. This was the moment she had once dreamed of. But now, she was no longer waiting for Cameron to recognize her. She was deciding whether he deserved another chance to stand beside her. The invitation to the leadership meeting arrived early the next morning. Victoria Hayes expected a discussion about her future. What she did not expect was to discover how much of her past had been hidden from her. She walked into the Northvale conference room wearing a simple navy blazer, carrying no presentation folder, no notes, and no need to prove herself. For the first time in years, she was not there to defend a strategy. She was there to understand the truth. Cameron Whitaker was already seated when she entered. He looked different from the man who had dismissed her at breakfast. The confidence was still there, but something underneath it had changed. Victoria, he said quietly, thank you for coming. She took her seat across from him. I am here because Redwood Crest requested this meeting. Not because you called. Cameron looked down for a moment. The honesty caught him off guard. Before he could respond, Daniel Brooks placed a folder on the table. There is something both of you need to see. He opened the documents carefully. Inside were years of investor reports, internal reviews, and strategic evaluations. Victoria recognized most of them immediately. They were the plans she had created. But one section caught her attention. It was a private investor analysis from Redwood Crest. She read the first page, then stopped. What is this? She asked. Daniel answered calmly. A recommendation we made 3 years ago. Cameron leaned forward. Recommendation for what? Daniel looked directly at him. For Victoria to become the public face of Northvale's strategy division. Silence filled the room. Victoria stared at the document. Why was I never told about this? Daniel looked uncomfortable. Because Cameron declined the proposal. Victoria slowly turned toward her husband. Cameron did not speak. For the first time, there was no explanation ready. No business reason. No confident answer. Just silence. You knew? Victoria asked. Cameron looked away. I thought it was better for the company if I remained the primary leader. Those words landed differently than the termination letter. Because this was not about one decision. It was about years of choices. Victoria realized Cameron had not simply failed to recognize her value. He had recognized it and chosen to keep it hidden. "You were afraid people would see how much I mattered," she said softly. Cameron shook his head. "That is not what happened." But even he sounded unsure. Daniel closed the folder. The investors did not choose Northvale because of one person. They chose it because of the combination of leadership, strategy, and execution. Removing one of those pieces created instability. Victoria looked at the documents again. For years, she had questioned whether she was asking for too much, whether wanting recognition made her selfish. But now she understood something important. She was not asking for a place at the table. She had helped build the table. Later that afternoon, Cameron found her outside the office. "Victoria, I know I made mistakes." She stopped walking. "Mistakes are forgetting a meeting. Mistakes are missing a deadline." She looked at him. "You made decisions that told me I did not matter." Cameron had no response. Because the hardest truth was not that Victoria had become powerful without him. It was that she had been powerful beside him the entire time. Before she left, Daniel approached her with a new proposal. Not to return as an employee. Not to work under Cameron. A position with full authority over strategic direction. Victoria looked at the offer, then at the company she had helped create. She knew the next decision would not be about proving herself. It would be about deciding who she wanted to become. And tomorrow's board meeting would reveal whether Northvale was ready to accept the woman it had spent years overlooking. The board meeting began at 9 in the morning, but the decision that would change Northvale had already been made before anyone entered the room. Everyone around the table knew why they were there. The company had reached a turning point, and for the first time, the person everyone wanted to hear from was not Cameron Whitaker. It was Victoria Hayes. Cameron sat quietly as the board members reviewed the situation. The investor concerns, the leadership changes, the sudden uncertainty after Victoria's departure. A few weeks earlier, he would have controlled this conversation. Today, he was waiting for someone else to explain the future of the company he created. Daniel Brooks from Redwood Crest opened the discussion. Northvale has always been built on strong ideas. But strong ideas require the right leadership to survive. He looked toward Victoria. "We would like to hear your vision." Victoria took a moment before answering. She looked around the room. The same room where decisions had been made without her. The same room where her work had been discussed, but her name was rarely mentioned. "My vision is simple," she said. "Northvale needs to stop depending on one person's image and start building around a stronger foundation." The room became quiet. She was not attacking Cameron. She was not trying to embarrass him. She was simply saying what she had believed for years. The company was bigger than one person. She presented her plan. It was not a plan to take control. It was a plan to rebuild trust. She explained how Northvale could improve communication, strengthen partnerships, and create a leadership structure where decisions were based on expertise instead of personal loyalty. As she spoke, even the executives who had once overlooked her began taking notes. Cameron watched silently. He noticed something that bothered him more than any criticism could have. Victoria was not trying to defeat him. She was trying to save the company. The company he almost damaged because of his own pride. When the presentation ended, one board member asked, "Victoria, if you were offered this position, what role would Cameron have?" The question changed the atmosphere. Everyone looked at her. This was the moment they expected revenge. They expected anger. But Victoria simply answered, "Cameron built the beginning of Northvale. That deserves respect. But leadership requires honesty, and trust has to be earned again." Cameron lowered his eyes. Those words affected him more than losing control of a meeting. Because Victoria was giving him something he did not give her. Fairness. After several hours of discussion, the board reached a decision. Victoria would return as Chief Strategy Officer with expanded authority over company direction and investor relations. Cameron would remain involved, but his decisions would require greater accountability from the board. The announcement was made internally that afternoon. Employees gathered around their screens reading the update. Many were surprised. Others were relieved. But the biggest surprise came when Cameron received a private message from Lauren Mitchell. "I need to talk to you about something." He met her later that evening, expecting questions about the transition. Instead, she placed a document on the table. "There is something you should know." Cameron opened it. His expression changed as he read the information. Lauren explained that before Victoria left, She had already prepared a contingency plan to protect Northvale in case leadership became unstable. She had never shown it because she believed Cameron would never need it. Cameron stared at the pages. Even when he pushed Victoria away, she had been protecting the company. Then Lauren said the one thing he was not prepared to hear. Cameron, there is another problem. The investors are not only asking for Victoria to return. They are questioning whether you should remain the person leading Northvale. For the first time, Cameron understood that the consequences of his decision were much bigger than a broken relationship. He was about to lose the company he thought belonged only to him. For the first time in years, Cameron Whitaker walked into Northvale and felt like he was no longer the person everyone was waiting for. The office looked the same. The glass walls, the conference rooms, the city view from the top floor. But something had changed. The company was still standing, and somehow the person who had been pushed aside was the reason it was still standing. Cameron spent the morning reviewing reports he had ignored before. Not because he suddenly cared about numbers, but because he was finally seeing the parts of the company he never took the time to understand. Every major growth decision connected back to Victoria Hayes. Every successful partnership had a history he never bothered to learn. Every crisis Northvale survived had someone quietly working behind the scenes. That person was his wife, the woman he believed he could remove with a signature. Later that afternoon, Cameron asked Victoria to meet him, not in his office, not in a place where he could feel in control. He chose a quiet conference room on the second floor, a place where they used to review plans together when the company was still small. Victoria arrived and sat across from him. "You wanted to talk," she said. Cameron nodded. For once, he did not have a prepared speech. "I owe you an apology." Victoria looked at him but did not respond. "Not just for what happened at breakfast," he continued. "For years of making you feel like your work was invisible." Those words surprised her, but she remained calm. "Cameron, the problem was never one morning." He looked down. "I know. It was every time someone praised the company and you accepted it without mentioning the person who helped build it." Cameron took a slow breath. "I thought being the leader meant being the one everyone saw." Victoria answered quietly. "A real leader does not need to make everyone else smaller." The room went silent. Cameron finally understood something he had avoided for years. He had not lost Victoria because she became more powerful. He lost her because he stopped seeing her as an equal. But then Victoria received a message from Daniel Brooks. It was urgent. She opened it, and her expression changed. Cameron noticed immediately. "What happened?" She turned the phone toward him. It was a report from Redwood Crest. The investors had discovered something unexpected during their review of Northvale's internal records. A major acquisition proposal from 2 years earlier had been credited entirely to Cameron. But the original negotiation documents showed Victoria's involvement. There was something else. The final agreement contained a strategic clause that protected Northvale during financial uncertainty. A clause written by Victoria. A clause Cameron had signed without reading carefully. Daniel's message was simple. The board needs to know who actually created the foundation of this company. Cameron stared at the screen. He remembered that deal. He remembered celebrating it. He remembered telling everyone he had saved Northvale. But he never asked who saved him. The next morning, an emergency board meeting was called. This time, the discussion was not about Victoria returning. That decision had already been made. The question was whether Cameron could continue leading a company when the trust of investors had changed. Before entering the meeting, Cameron stopped Victoria. "I know I cannot fix everything." She looked at him. "No, you cannot." He nodded, accepting the truth. "But I want to understand what I should have seen years ago." Victoria held his gaze for a moment. "Then start by listening." Inside the boardroom, the final decision waited. And Cameron was about to discover that losing control of a company was painful. But losing the respect of the person who believed in him first was something much harder to accept. The boardroom was silent before Cameron Whitaker even sat down. He looked around the table and saw faces he had known for years. Executives who had celebrated Northvale's biggest victories. Investors who had trusted his leadership. People who once looked to him for every answer. But today, nobody was waiting for Cameron to speak first. They were waiting to hear what he had finally learned. Daniel Brooks placed the final review documents on the table. "The investors have reached a decision," he said. "Northvale will continue moving forward with Victoria Hayes leading strategic direction." Cameron nodded slowly. A year ago, those words would have felt like a threat. Today, They felt like the truth he needed to accept. One board member looked at him carefully. Cameron, this company was built because of your vision. But vision alone does not create something lasting. It requires people who can challenge you, support you, and tell you when you are wrong. Cameron looked down at the table. For once, he did not defend himself. He did not explain. He simply listened. The board decided that Cameron would remain involved as founder, but Victoria would have full authority over strategy, investor relationships, and long-term growth decisions. The same areas he once believed belonged only to him. After the meeting, Cameron found Victoria standing near the office window, looking out over the city. The same view they had looked at years earlier when Northvale was just an idea written on a few pages. "You got everything you deserved," Cameron said. Victoria turned toward him. "No, I got what I worked for." He smiled slightly because he knew the difference. "I spent so much time trying to prove I was the reason this company succeeded." Victoria stayed quiet. "I never realized I was surrounded by someone who was helping me succeed the entire time." She looked at him for a moment. "Cameron, the hardest part was never losing my position at Northvale." He listened carefully. "It was realizing that the person I trusted most was the person who believed I could be replaced." Those words stayed with him, because they were not angry words. They were honest words. And somehow, that made them harder to hear. Months later, Northvale entered a new chapter. Under Victoria's leadership, the company expanded into new markets, rebuilt investor confidence, and created a stronger executive structure. But the biggest change was not financial. It was cultural. Employees who once stayed silent began sharing ideas. Young leaders were given opportunities. People were recognized for the work they contributed, not just the names attached to the company. Cameron watched from a different place. He was still part of Northvale, but he was no longer hiding behind the title of founder. He became someone who asked questions before making decisions. Someone who listened before speaking. One evening, he attended a company event where Victoria was giving a speech. She stood on stage, confident and calm, introducing the next generation of leaders. She was no longer standing beside someone else's dream. She was standing inside the future she helped create. Cameron watched the audience applaud her, and for the first time, he did not feel replaced. He felt proud, because the greatest lesson was not that Victoria had won and Cameron had lost. The lesson was that people are not valuable because of the positions they hold or the recognition they receive. Their value exists long before anyone notices it. And sometimes, the biggest mistake someone can make is pushing away the person who was quietly helping them become better. Victoria Hayes did not need revenge. She needed to remember who she was. And Cameron Whitaker did not lose his company in one morning. He lost the illusion that he was building it alone.